Joining us now, Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and former Middle East foreign policy consultant for the Biden-Harris campaign. Joel, good to have you with us this morning. Let's pick up where Hadass left off there. As we heard in her piece, there's some pessimism on the part of the Palestinians, but there is hope, as we just heard from one official. They continue to hope for serious outcomes. Realistically, what do you expect to come of this meeting?
Yeah, Erica, this is a very important meeting. It's putting the Palestinian issue back on the map. What Joe Biden is doing here in Israel today, where I'm in Jerusalem, as well as going to Bethlehem and then to Saudi Arabia, is restoring American global leadership and putting issues back in the discussion that President Trump dropped in the most damaging way to American interests and to the region. So this discussion, these meetings, we're seeing some movement. President Abbas spoke with the Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid recently. We're seeing more American aid going in. It's not going to resolve everything for certain, and that's a core to understanding this. This cannot be all resolved in one day, but this is now starting a discussion at the highest level, and that's very important.
And we'll see where those discussions lead. Also want to ask you about some comments that we heard. Elliot Gotkind just played those comments that President Biden made to Israeli TV saying you could use force as a last resort when it comes to Iran. That is a very strong statement, as opposed to everything is on the table, acknowledging that force could be an option here. Is the U.S. prepared for that?
Yeah, Erica, I think the president is restating longstanding American policy, but what he did say directly in that interview, which is very important, is he spoke to the Israeli people and he said diplomacy is the best path, and frankly, the only path to preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon, which is why he continues to push it and pursue it. And he's going to make that case as well in the Gulf with our Gulf allies. The Israelis need to hear this clearly. The president being here is showing that he has their back on many different security issues that have been discussed. But he is making the case that diplomacy is the best route. The last resort option is the last resort, and that's been a policy position going back multiple presidents.
We learned earlier this week, Iran partnering with Russia, supplying some of these attack drones for use in Ukraine. How much do you think that is figuring into this? You say this is long-standing policy, but this is, sort of the most stark statement that we've heard to this point to say, right, that force could be an option here.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing with Iran in its efforts in the region, it's frankly its terrorist activities in the region, support for militias, is that it has frightened the region into organizing itself to resist Iran. And so President Biden calling out Iran, putting sanctions onto Iran's activities, working with our allies. You'll see more engagement on the defense side. This is all heading us in the direction of potentially greater conflict. And that's what President Biden is trying to avoid by being here diplomatically. Can't emphasize enough how important it is for him to be here in person, restoring American diplomatic leadership, talking to our allies tough about both the adversaries they face as well as the realistic options. He's not looking for military action, but he certainly is not keeping his eyes shut as to the behavior that Iran is engaging in across the region.
As we watch what is playing out, as we just heard from Wolf, of course, and we're going to hear a little bit more in a news conference later this morning about the security declaration. This, of course, is all teeing up the next trip, right, which comes in Saudi Arabia, where there is a lot of focus specifically on will there be a handshake? Will there not be a handshake? What will actually be brought up in terms of human rights abuses? How important is it for there to be a very strong statement from President Biden specifically talking about human rights?
It's very important. It's important for his credibility back at home, as well as his policy in the region, which is to promote human rights. And that doesn't mean that every issue is going to be resolved. And that's the hardest part about this is to try to advance the ball while also engaging. Now, Saudi Arabia has been a longtime strategic partner of the United States. President Biden was right to call Mohammed bin Salman out for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. But that doesn't mean that we cut and rupture relations. And I don't think the Biden team wants to do that. But he is going to have to talk openly. He's going to have to press on that. And certainly the countries in the region are also going to see the United States providing support, military support and diplomatic support for their goals as well. A lot of discussions and a lot of different issues at the same time.
And do you think that he will be pressed in this news conference on the findings regarding the death of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh?
It's a hot issue within the Palestinian political world, the Palestinian world, and certainly in the U.S. as well. And American journalists being killed should never happen anywhere ever. And I think that for the president, he will get pressed. He will certainly, it will touch on him. He'll see pictures. I was in Bethlehem recently. He'll see pictures of Shireen all around him. So it's going to come up, and the administration is making efforts to speak to the family directly to try to make sure that they understand that the administration is doing what it can to rectify this. But this is a very hard situation. It should never have happened.
Joel Rubin, appreciate you joining us this morning.